My name is Bert Kenwood. I'm a volunteer at Cambridge Beer Festival, have been for many years, 20 years now, I think. I'm also CAMRA's brewery liaison person for Milton Brewery, which I've done for about 15 years. So this means I have to keep Milton Brewery in check and make sure they're doing the right thing by CAMRA's view, which isn't particularly challenging. So without further ado, I will hand over to Richard, who is one of the founders of Milton Brewery. Milton was founded in 1999, which makes it our area's longest established brewery. We don't have anything older than that. It's 21 years old, so that's pretty established, really. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello.
For those who don't know you.
Hello, I'm Richard Naisby. I founded Milton Brewery, and for my sins, I'm still going. And yeah, hello everybody out there. As you can possibly tell from the background, I'm currently sat at the tail end of our virtual beer festival pop-up thing at the back of the Haymakers, and we've just stopped serving. So I'm sat in the garden, socially distanced from everybody around, but if a motorbike goes past, it might get a bit noisy.
So I suggest that we start with one of your beers, Richard.
Yes.
I have here half a pint of Pegasus.
Would
you like to talk about it? Coincidence?
Yeah, funny that. Yeah, Pegasus. Well, it's our flagship. It was the first beer we ever brewed. We brewed a sort of proto Pegasus as Guile number 1. For those who aren't familiar with how brewers do numberings and weird names for things, what we do every single brew has to have a Guile number. Guile number 1 was proto Pegasus. To this day, it's the longest ever brewing day we've ever had. It started about 3 o'clock in the morning with driving over to Whitney, to Witchwood Brewery, to meet a very old friend of mine called Chris Moss, who was the founder of Witchwood, who had very... It has... It is now sort of a beer to please the traditionalist, but anybody who likes beer, it's a proper beer drinker's beer is what I would call it.
Well, I'm certainly enjoying it. So we've tried one of your beers. I think it might be useful to get a bit of history of your brewery, Richard.
Yeah.
If you'd like to talk us through how it started all those years ago.
Yeah.
And where you've gone since then.
Absolutely. Well, the genesis of Milton Brewery is, I dare say, a little bit more unusual than some, in that I met the brewery, the other founder, halfway up a mountain in Pakistan. I was hitchhiking to China and back. He was cycling from London to Alaska, across Asia. Both of us had spent quite a long time in Islamic countries and were a bit on the thirsty side. And so we sat on a rock high above the Hunza Valley, and we do have some pickies, I believe. And that was our view. And that is the Hunza Valley in Pakistan. It's one of the most... hello? Taxi for someone. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, but it's not really the beeriest of places. And so, yeah, we got to talking about beer, and we became friends. And a couple of years later, we needed something to do with our lives, and I suggested setting up a brewery, and Cambridge seemed like a pretty good place to set up a brewery. I'm sure the Hunza Valley of Pakistan would be a pretty good place to, you'd have plenty of customers, but I'm not sure it'd be terribly legal. So Cambridge was as good as we could think of.
So once you got back from Pakistan, what happened next? So you built a brewery.
Yeah, we decided we wanted to build a brewery. We looked around the country for somewhere that seemed, both of us were living in London at the time, and we looked for somewhere that seemed within fighting distance of London, but didn't have a brewery, and that Cambridge fitted the bill at the time. And I was working as a cycle courier. In fact, Tony was as well. I'd been hit by a car, and my lawyer and Adam Brooks Hospital were sorting me out. So I had this Cambridge connection. It seemed like a good place to set up. We found a small industrial unit in Milton, so we named the brewery after the place. We've always said that you're not a proper brewery until you've actually moved from the place that you've taken your name from. Plenty of breweries have done that, and now we have, because we're now in Waterbeach. But the original brewery was in Milton, and we were there for 13 years. And things sort of bobbled along for a while. We supplied Cambridge Beer Festival and Cambridge pubs, and we were supplying more beer to pubs in Peterborough than we were in Cambridge. And a Peterborough pub came on the market, and we thought, given that we're already supplying a lot of beer in Peterborough, what would happen if we bought one? So we did, and that was we set up a new company called Individual Pubs to run pubs that sell our beer, and that was the Colleavers Arms on Park Street in Peterborough.
And I believe we have a photo of that for you, in fact.
I think we do.
There we go.
Ah,
oh, that's not the one.
No, I'd forgotten.
That's not the Colleavers Arms.
That's not the Colleavers Arms. That's the Colleavers Arms. Okay, the previous one was the evening party we had at the at Milton Brewery, which featured some people that turned into flats. But I'm waiting on the planning permission, and I don't suppose it'll be terribly quick. So can you run it for me? And we said, yeah, okay, we'll run it for you. How long do you think it'll take? And he said about 6 months. And I think we ran it for 7 years. And that was the Oakdale, which is in Haringey. He did, in the end, knock it down. I don't think he ever built the block of flats, but it's a while since I've been that way. But it was a great big lump of a pub in a slightly odd area, very close to Seven Sisters. We made his life inadvertently hard for him, because we turned it into a thriving boozer, and won quite a lot of local camera awards, and that made his planning permission a teeny bit trickier than I think he was expecting, hence how we ran it for 7 years. But while this was going on, we were building the original plan, which was pub number 2, which was the Pembury Tavern, which we had for rather longer. And I think there you are. So the Pembury that people knew on the right started off as an absolutely burnt out shell. You can see that's a few months into the reconstruction of it. It was, and there's the bar being built, but it literally was just walls. It had no roof, it had no floor. It was basement to sky before we took it. And this is pretty much the story of what we've done with all of our pubs. We buy wreckers and do them up. And the Pembury is probably one of the better examples. That was the opening party, February 2006, and it was an eccentric place. It's still very much loved in Hackney. We sold it a couple of years ago to a local brewery that at the time obviously didn't exist, and that's 5 Points. But
you were quite ahead of the curve with Hackney, really, weren't you? I mean, Hackney was yet to be up and coming even at that point, I think. So
yeah, it helped that when I was in London, I was in Leighton, which was next door, and I used to cycle past this wrecker of a pub just about every day. So I knew the area reasonably well. So when the opportunity came up, it wasn't the great leap of faith that I think a lot of people imagined that it was for us. We weren't taking the enormous risk because I did know the area reasonably well. So yeah, Hackney's come a long way since those times. Cheers.
So your next pub after that was the White Lion in Norwich.
Indeed.
Here we have the before picture.
Yeah, the usual story. It had been shut for, I think, 4 years. It's in a pretty bad way. It's a very, very old building and a real mishmash. The coal levers had been bombed by the Luftwaffe in 1941, I think, and the White Lion had been bombed in the Baedeker Blitz in 1944-ish. So the right-hand bit, the flat bit of that roof that you can see was an old hairdresser shop that had been sort of added on when the bombs hit. The core of the pub dates from the 1550s, but yeah, it was in, well, it's obvious it's seen better days. It was in a right old state. This was 2007. The lead was missing off the roof. It was pouring rain through the bar. We had our work cut out, and it was also the point really at which the financial system of the dev was a desperate attempt to wean you off your bad habits of beer abuse. I think the next slide. Yeah, you see, you're supposed to wait until there's a tap in it. And for anybody who's watching out there, that was actually a genuinely contemporaneous photograph taken while we were building the dev, but it was quite a full cask.
That's really that. I think that's why I'm drinking a bit with a straw, right? Because it's too full rather than because I was very thirsty. But who knows?
We'll preserve your blushes.
That's why I've turned my camera off.
Yeah.
So what happened? So after that, so you've now got 4 pubs running, or yes, 4 pubs running.
Yeah,
the Oakdale's still going, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the next step after that was to expand the brewery.
Yeah, the Oakdale closed in 2011. It was a bit of a shame, but what was a 7-month or 6 or 7 month experiment had lasted 7 years, and the Pembury was by then absolutely rocking. Hackney, as you say, had taken off, but the Oakdale was falling down around our ears. The owner wouldn't spend any money on it because he planned to knock it down, and wouldn't let us spend any money on it because he planned to knock it down. So we closed the Oakdale by mutual agreement, really. And the 4 pubs became 3, but there were very few at this point. The number of breweries in the UK was starting to rise pretty steeply, but and especially in London. But we were still a bit of a rarity around here. So we were busy. We'd pretty much outgrown the original Milton Brewery, to the point where we were washing all our casks outside. The brewery was rammed. Every last space was taken up with vessels. We were renting it. Our landlords were being less than helpful, and it was time to move on. And we looked for places in Milton, obviously, because we enjoyed being in Milton. It was a great place, but something came up in Waterbeach, which we sort of considered Greater Milton, and we took a look at it, and it was an ex electron microscope manufacturing place, and we went to see it, and that's Tim Capper, my business partner, fellow director, looking somewhat overawed at the Indiana Jones last scene racks of infinite numbers of bits of stuff that were in this building. They'd gone bust. It was a fire sale, and it was a fairly large building full, and I mean full, of stuff like this. And we put in a bid. We got it. We cleared it out. It took a long time to clear it out, and then we had to convert it into something that we could brew in. Which this is a photo of the conversion. So this is the brewery floor. All breweries are pretty wet places, so you've got to build some kind of drainage into your floor, and that's what's going on here. And that is Pegasus House. That's the home of the Milton Brewery. We've got some offices around the front and we're around the back. It's a hell of a step up from what we had in Milton, and that is the old Milton Brewery being demolished. We had to do the conversion in about 3 weeks in July, which is not the best time of year to be shifting breweries, if you're honest. It's all a bit too hot. And so, yeah, we shifted all the vessels. We weren't too impressed with the cleaning at the old place, but you put it in the new place, and it's all rather nice, and it still looks like that, which is great, because we're 8 years on from that. We rationalised it. It's much easier second time around to build a brewery, and yeah, still pretty good.
Sorry, I was muted there. So around this time, you had some success in the Champion Beer Britain contest.
Yeah, we were a bit nonplussed there. We'd signed all the contracts. We had to move, and then we found out we were in the finals for Champion Beer of Britain, and the timings couldn't be shifted. And it turned out that the first brew we did in Waterbeach was Pegasus, and we didn't really have much hopes for it, because when you start a brewery, it's bloody difficult. But we sent it off down to London anyway. We won bronze with it, which was fabulous, because the amount of time and effort that we'd put into the brew move was enormous, and to suddenly get what was our biggest award was superb. It's all a bit of a blur, to be honest. The hours that we were putting in moving a brewery and fighting with the landlord of the old place and all the rest of it was an extraordinary time. My wife was pregnant, and yeah, but fantastic. What a win.
So what's the next stage in your story after this? So,
well, we've
moved the brewery.
We've just sold the Oakdale. We've moved the brewery, and realised that we've now got a lot more capacity. All of the problems associated with the old brewery of access and having to cask wash outside and vessels stacked on top of each other have all gone away. So we can afford to sort of spread our wings a bit, and coincidentally, a pub in Chesterton, this one that's around me, came on the market. I mean, it had been shut for a couple of years, and again wasn't in the best of nick, and had struggled for some years before it closed, and the price had been drifting around, but you can see there's weeds growing everywhere. So this is when we were looking around it, but we put in a bid. The horrible low ceiling in the bar, so we thought we'd have a bit of a poke around and see what we could do with it. And by now we'd got the experience. We knew we could do that to the bar. We took out the false ceiling. We took that's the side room, and the next shot is taken from precisely the same place. That is the same camera angle, and if you flick backwards and forwards, you can kind of see why it failed as a pub in the past, and why we spent a lot of time and a lot of money getting it right, and it was an immediate success. The Pembury took a while to get going. The Dev was an immediate success, but the Haymakers was just crying out for it. And oops, something went weird.
So after the Haymakers, the next step was rather more dramatic. So the next pub after that, in that it didn't actually exist. Well, it did exist, but in the wrong place.
Yeah. So we thought we'd done pretty well with that transformation. So we got a bit ambitious and took that hole in the ground. Well, we actually made the hole in the ground. The hole in the ground was the previous car park of the Queen Edith pub, and we transformed it a bit into the pub that is there now.
You can see it's got quite a big cellar from that hole in the ground as well.
Yeah, it's I've not had too many opportunities to build pubs from scratch, but I lost count of the number of pub cellars I've banged my head, smacked my brains on various low-hanging beams, etc. And having operated pubs now for the best part of 20 years, you've never got enough storage space in a pub. There's always need for a bit more. So when it came to building one, I decided I'd start not just from the ground up, but under the ground up. And yeah, so we built the QE to last, and that's now 5 years ago. And that's the last major thing that we've done. We sold the Pembury a couple of years ago. We've leased out the White Lion. We sold the Colevers, and the Colevers was sort of a bit of an emotional wrench, but the world of beer had changed. We were no longer a local brewery to Peterborough. There were lots of other little breweries that had sprung up, and you've got to recognise these things.
Yeah, so things have changed really quite dramatically, haven't they? From around 200 breweries when you started in the country, of that order?
Probably a few more than that, but
not a vast number. And
no, probably 300 to 400. Now we're about 2,000. It bonkers the number. I remember when we started the looking at the Pembury. London was down to one brewery, it was Fuller's, because meantime we're mid-move and Young's had gone. And I have no idea how many breweries there are in London at the moment, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't three figures.
So we have a question in from Mr. Neil Taylor, who I think we might know. he says, "Hi Richard, really interesting to see the history of the buildings. 21 years feels a long time in beer. How have your beers themselves changed since you started? Did you change anything with the upgrade to Waterbeach?"
How have they changed? Pegasus is the same. I mean, the recipe hasn't changed. The original beers that we produced, what we've always done is go with what is popular with the public. So we had a range of 7 beers to start with. Minotaur, the mild, still going, never changed recipe. Pegasus still going, never changed recipe. Cyclops we do from time to time, and Mammon we do once a year. They're the ones from the original range that are still going. And what we've done is as tastes and hops and malts and yeasts have changed over the years, we've introduced usually festival specials or seasonal specials, and if they've proved popular, we've kept them. I think the last one that we did that was sort of stuck permanent, it was Minerva, and that started in a Twitter conversation in all the modern way of things with Mary Beard, who was a bit not that we didn't seem to have any female characters. You know, we got lots of Roman emperors and gods, but not many goddesses. And I said, well, okay, well, you name something after a female character, and you can have it, and come along and brew it. And she did. that stuck.
So the questions are coming in thick and fast now. So we have a question from Clara Todd, who asks, do you have any plans to bottle or can your beers?
We've been asked this question for the best part of 20 years. And I've always said not in the immediate future. And that's largely been based on my own personal life. You know, we're a small business. This is how people do things. I like drinking beer in pubs, and I like the whole community thing. Until the last couple of months, I don't drink beer at home. I go to the pub, I drink beer with my mates or with strangers, whatever. I think beer is a social drink, and I like Belgian bottles and all the rest of it. Belgium's a very long way to go on my bike to go and have a pint, so that's perfectly reasonable. But I've always thought the British beer works best in pubs. The events of the last couple of months have possibly changed my view on that, and
that canning line would have been really useful.
Yeah, that canning line that seemed like an expensive toy a few years ago, probably very, very useful indeed at the moment. And I don't really know how things are going to pan out in future. If anybody has a crystal ball, please get in touch. But I'd like to think that when this is all over, we're all going to go roaring back to the pub and socially distance for as long as it takes, and then life will get back to normal, because that's what I enjoyed.
Thank you. So we have another question from Matt, who asks, what is your favourite Milton Brewery beer? I'm not sure which of us is asking that. I suppose probably you, but I will answer it as well. I think probably I would say Marcus Aurelius, not as probably as a session beer, but as a occasional beer, or maybe the end of a night beer. You can't go far wrong with the Marcus Aurelius.
It varies. It varies all the time. So on a hot day, something like Minerva or Justinian. On a cold, drizzly day, a typical English day, something like Pegasus. But yeah, Marcus Aurelius, if it's snowing outside, I can't think of a better beer to sit by a roaring fire, you know, in a convivial pub than Marcus Aurelius. So yeah, it literally, it changes. I change with the seasons, but I suppose the beer that's sort of closest to my heart is Pegasus, because it's been there. We built the brewery on it.
I mean, thinking of your beers, we have a question from Danny Dix, who says, "What's the rationale behind the Roman and Greek theme to the beer names, or the general classical theme?" Yeah,
yeah. Milton. If you're in Cambridge, it's known for a damn great Tesco's and not a lot else. If you're in the wider British world, Milton, and you've got kids, Milton is the baby bottle sterilizing fluid. John Milton also wrote Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, the great classical works of the 17th century, and we wanted people thinking great classical works rather than baby bottle sterilizing fluid. So there were a load of good names out there. We thought we'd nick them.
Then we have two questions about pubs. So Mickey asks, "What's your favourite pub in Cambridge?" And Sarah asks, "What makes a great pub?" They're probably related, these two questions.
Yeah, I mean, any pub that's open right now would be extremely welcome.
What made a great pub then?
What made a great pub? People, without a doubt. Anybody who's known me a long time knows. I used to drink in the Radigan until Terry died. When Terry's been dead 8 years now. Terry Kavanagh, who's the long-time landlord of the Rad. That was a small pub full of large characters, and the largest by some margin was the landlord. It's community, it's spirit, it has to be good beer. There's no good having a good pub is just not a good pub without decent beer. But it's your mates. I think an architecturally interesting pub beats a boring one every time. Great food is obviously a bonus. That's what we try and do in all of our pubs. But just like the choice of beer changes with the seasons, so sometimes just the choice of pub. Yeah, I'm sat outside in the Haymakers at the moment on a glorious hot May day. That's fantastic. The Dev with the fire roaring with it snowing outside is a lovely thing. So sometimes your choice of pub can be determined by your mood and the weather.
And Sarah has another question. Is there a style or type of beer that you've not brewed that you really like to make?
A good question. Probably not. There are styles of beer that I like, that I've and drink that I've no intention of trying to replicate. I've got friends here. I like Belgian beers. I drink Gers and lambic beers and all the rest of it. But they're very dangerous things to let into a traditional British brewery, which is essentially what we are. So if we had a yeast that would stand it, I would probably like to brew a truly strong beer. But our yeast is pretty much flat out at about 9%. And the tax regime in this country is not favourable to people who don't can and bottle with beers above about 7.5%. So it's not really a problem. If people change the ground rules, I reserve the right to change my opinion on that one.
Seems reasonable. So you mentioned briefly earlier on how the lockdown has been affecting you. How's it? I would like to speak a bit more about that, as to how the lockdown's affected you recently and how it's going to affect the industry as a whole.
Well, it's taken out 99% of our customers. Because what we sold was beer to pubs, and every pub in the country shut, or shut to normal trade at least. So, yeah, we're down to about 10% of our previous trade. We can't. The directors can't be furloughed. We furloughed half the staff, and we're selling direct to the public. We're opening up, apart from this week, we've been opening up every Thursday, Friday and Saturday for direct sales. We're open for direct sales for polypins, which is the smallest amount we're allowed to sell by law, and firkins, which are 72 pints, polypins 36 pints. We're selling those daily, and we're asking government to relax the regulations that are preventing us doing any more. We're trading on temporary event notices at the moment, and people are being extremely supportive, which is fabulous. We're very happy to have such supportive customers out there, but yeah, I won't pretend it's easy.
And your beer is going to be available at the Haymakers again tomorrow evening?
Yeah, tomorrow evening. We're thinking about Friday. I personally, I'm going to have to be very careful about being in two places at once, but it's been a tremendous success today. We had a queue at the gates when we opened. The festival special went in 46 minutes. We've got more beer in the brewery. We've got a lot of beer in the brewery.
So the festival special is very good as well.
Yeah,
you've gone from the Pegasus.
Yeah, I can't do that because we ran out. So yeah, it's this is an unprecedented situation, but we're just trying to make the best of it.
So a question from Mickey again. When do you think pubs might realistically open again?
Out of my hands, I'm afraid. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean,
do you think it'll be during the summer or after the summer?
I honestly don't know. I'd like to think it would be as soon as possible, you know, so long as it's safe. I'm not a virologist or an epidemiologist. It's out of my hands.
Yeah. As soon as possible. And then we have another question from Neil Taylor. So apart from the current situation, what's the thing you'd most like to see changed in the wider UK pub scene?
There's a long-term CAMRA aspiration to halve beer duty for large pack, so barrels, casks, for real ale. I'd love to see that. I don't see why people should pay the same tax on beer served in pubs as they do in Tesco's. Tesco's have enormous advantages, and I think the advantages of drinking beer in pubs in a supervised environment with an expert serving you should be recognised in law, and that seems the best way to me.
And do you think the power of pub companies, obviously pub companies larger than the individual pub company, do you think that needs to be reined in somewhat? The Enterprise Inns and Punches of this world?
Yes. Yeah, I mean they have power, but they don't have. There is no monopoly situation going on there. I think the power of the supermarkets is far greater, and to an extent, you know, as a pub operator, I feel able to compete with Punch and Enterprise. I think we're good enough to compete with them. What I can't compete with is the buying power of the big supermarkets and the aggressive behaviour of the big supermarkets as well. So recognising that in tax would be good.
So we have a question that gives you quite a good opportunity to plug tomorrow's session at the Haymakers. It's a question from Clara Todd. Can you remind me how to buy beer from the Haymakers?
Turn up between 5 and 7 with a clean container that you can fill with beer and a card which is capable of contactless. And we will take your container, fill it with the beer of your choice, and take payment by contactless. And please observe all the social distancing bits that go with it.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from anybody? If not, I think we've covered everything you wanted to say, Richard. So I think you possibly wanted to say a word about your friend Chris from Richard Brewery.
Yeah. I sort of alluded to the genesis of the brewery up a mountain in Pakistan, which is absolutely true. But the reason I got into beer and the reason I wanted to be a brewer was this gentleman on the right, who founded Lichfield Brewery a very long time ago, 40 years ago, who sadly died 19 years ago. And an absolutely tremendous character, with this beer in hand, dicky bow on, and yeah, a wonderful raconteur and legend, and a tremendous friend to brewers all around the country. I don't think you'll find a brewer who knew him who has a bad word to say about Chris. And without his support in the early days and his inspiration, there would be no Milton Brewery. And one of there was a various things on Twitter recently with the anniversary of VE Day, possibly the finest VE Day party there ever was after the original, was Chris's 50th anniversary VE Day party, and it just occurred to me that, you know, this is a difficult time, and there's lots of people going through a lot of things, and it's a reflective time as well as a lockdown time, and I got thinking about Chris and thought, well, been asked to reflect upon the history of Milton Brewery. Well, there wouldn't be one without him, and I'll raise a glass to the memory of a good old boy. I think you might have muted yourself, but
thank you, Richard. Question from Pete and Andy: which beers will you have on at the Haymakers tomorrow?
Good question. We will definitely have Marcus Aurelius, Pegasus. I think we will have Justinian. We will have the festival special. We will probably have Colosseum. We took quite a hit tonight, and so when I get into the brewery in the morning, I will be running off beers, because obviously we're having to do this bright, you know, beers sitting outside without cooling is not a good idea. So we're bringing them fresh down from the brewery every day. We may have Minerva. I'm not sure. We may possibly have Nero. We will not run out of beer tomorrow.
A selection of beers, then.
A wide selection of beers. Yes.
Good. So I think that's probably everything for this evening, Richard. Thank you very much for your time. I hope people have enjoyed the session today. We're now halfway through our sessions. This was number 6 of 12. I don't know how many people have been to already. So we've got 6 left throughout the rest of the week. We've got talks with various other brewers and cider makers. I don't think I'll be forgiven for forgetting that bit. In slightly over half an hour, we'll be talking to one of our area's newest breweries, Brewboard, who've not been around for 21 years, but they're down in Harston, and they'll be talking about their beers as well. So if you come on to that, that would be very good. Oh, we have one more question. What's the smallest volume that you can buy in the Haymakers?
I suppose technically speaking, 1/3 of a pint.
So if you bring a 1/3 of a pint bottle along, that'll be
yeah. Probably a pint would make your journey to the Haymakers a bit more worthwhile.
How far away they are.
Well,
it's next door, then
yeah, absolutely. It is entirely possible to pop along, pick up a pint, nip back to your abode next door, and come back at frequent intervals.
Well, I suppose you do just make at that point very clear that it is for takeaway only.
It is for takeaway only.
Very definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just leaves me to say thank you to Richard again, and thank you to David for looking after the technical side of this evening. And we will see you all next year at the Beer Festival and later on this week at the Beer Festival online. Thank you for your time and thank you for coming.
Thank you.